are the top.
That's interesting. Did you find anything in particularly in that story that you thought, okay, this has to be a comic in Tong Tong Summer?
Oh well, let's say that all the many of the fusion, the mix of traditional elements and androids and this nanny, I think it's very good. And um, the same for 100 Ghost Parade Tonight.
Maybe the
mixes
point of view from a little child.
a little child. There are many elements that could work very well, and we are doing a series, so we will do kind of Chinese comics, but with Italian artists, and yeah, so it looks promising. We'll see.
I love it. It's a good experiment.
Oh yes, it is an experiment, of course, with a very limited budget, with the artists that are collaborating. But that's future fiction style, We try to do the best with what we have. And
Perfect.
But yeah, one step at a time. Yeah, we're doing quite good things.
Yeah. Hi everyone. If somebody wants to present, yourself,
this is like a big
the
party.
Chat, or say hi, open the camera, please go ahead, don't be shy.
Hello, I'm Thiago. I'm a Brazilian writer. Excited to be here.
Hi, Thiago.
Hello. Even though I cannot see you.
Yeah,
I'm not quite sure the voice is from like which chart.
Okay.
You can set it to the gallery view, 画廊视图. Then you can see like the multiple views. Yeah.
How can I do that?
右上角.
It's on the upper right corner.
Yeah, the connection is unstable too. Again.
Yeah, but at least we can listen to you. Okay.
Yeah, as long as we have audio, I think it should be, that's the most crucial element.
And you are moving now, because you move.
Oh, cute doggy.
Okay. Well, we are already 52, and it's just 3 minutes past 3. Shall we wait until past 5, or you tell me? It's up to you. How long?
You are the host.
Yes, I know I am the host, but I don't want to be like dictating the time and just.
Don't worry.
Yes. No, asking 5
You
minutes.
will not be blamed today.
Yeah, of course, people can join. First of all, I really need to thank Anna, because she, no, really, she makes things possible in many possible ways. So really, thank you very much. I mean,
no, it's a pleasure, Francesco.
But it's a good way to to acknowledge the fact that that you are doing things happening. That's important.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
And it's really happy when we can see these 3 continent things like Brazil, Europe, and China together is a wonderful thing. And this is probably the only good thing about the coronavirus, that it made us so resilient and so trying to connect regardless of all the problems. So yeah, that's start.
And we all use like the English as our like second or third language.
Yeah, that's also another thing. Yeah, we might go into that. That's my weak point. Using English.
Why?
Because it's a necessary bad, in the sense that we need to use it, even though
yes,
we shouldn't.
Sometimes we dislike.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I love the English language, but it's just a matter to, to communicate. And it's because of all these languages that, yeah, anyway. Somebody here wrote a story about a universal communicator that will help us, right, Regina?
Yeah, but that won't necessarily help people to really like communicate with each other. I suggest next time we can use Chinese. Yeah, you really need to work hard on that.
Very hard.
Yeah.
Possibly hard.
Yeah, with all the bilingual books you published.
Yeah. Okay, you want me to start in Chinese?
Yes.
大家好，我叫 Francesco Verso. That's all I know. Unfortunately.
Good. I totally forgot how to say hello in Italian. Like how to say that, like a good evening.
Say ciao.
Mhm.
Ciao is enough. Ciao, Francesco.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Yeah, ciao.
It's not,
No,
it's
I'm
not-
kidding. I'm kidding. Francesco can teach us.
Ciao. That's right. Yeah. All right. I think, let me see. It's 3:07 and we are 55. I think we can just start and easy. And so the second and of course and not least importance thank is for the guest here, Xiajia and Regina Kanyu Wang. They have accepted my invitation to talk about women in science fiction, but it's a kind of conversation that will probably land in other topics, but the idea was to try to map the situation and see the steps that have been done and what possibly could be done, could be achieved in the next year. So let's see. First of all, I really also want to thank everybody for being here from many different countries and situations. We're still trying to get back to a new kind of normality, but slowly. I'm really happy to announce that we will do a Eurocon in Rome. So if you also can manage to come to Italy in mid-July, we will have a lot of conversation about science fiction. I want to start with a little introduction, just to set up the pace and the atmosphere. When I started to look for science fiction from many different countries, the reason was that going to bookstore, I was always finding, let's say, the same kind of book written by a white American man that was also many often dead by 20 or 30 years in Italy. Okay. And so I started to ask myself what happened to the rest of the world and what happened to the representativity of science fiction. And that set me really on a long quest. And I found out amazing things that I was really surprised in a way, but on another side, I wasn't really surprised at all. Because of course, I knew that science fiction was happening everywhere. It was just a matter of business and translation and commercialization of these voices that was not getting out of their countries, right? So just to say the progression of, and that's something that I also experienced myself over the last years. When I started to publish Nebula, the first Italian Chinese science fiction anthology, we had one story from Xiajia, and the rest were from male authors. And a year later, when I published Sinosfera, we had two stories from women, Fan Yilun and Tang Fei. And the third anthology, Artificina, we had Peng Ximeng, Fan Yilun, and Kanyu Wang, 3. And then I started to publish single anthologies of female authors. So we have Xia Jia with her personal anthology. We have Regina Kanyu Wang with her short novel. Nubel and Nibia, Cloud and Mist in English. And then this year we have Mu Ming, also Color the World with her personal anthology. That is to say that the science fiction doesn't have a gender, doesn't have a flag, doesn't have a religion, doesn't have a country. It belongs to everybody, to the world. So my first, but of course this is an issue. Okay, it's not so it's not so simple. It's not so easy. And my first question is of course a kind of provocation. Okay, in the 60s, Italian science fiction authors have been asked to change their names into American ones to look more appealing to the readers. And for the same reason, American women in the 70s have been asked to change their names into masculine ones. So the dominant culture is always imposing the standards to all the other identities that they do not consider relevant. How is the situation in China? How is the situation in your country at the moment? So first, Xia Jia.
Start from me.
Yeah.
I think that's very interesting that for the first question, it's very hard for Chinese people to change their name in like a totally Western style. But it really, it do happen that some like writers, when they start to establish their own writing style, they just started with like mimic the English writing, which translated into Chinese writing style. So we call it, it's like a 翻译腔, which is literally mean like a translation style writing. Even me, when I published my first story, when I was like 20, my first story just reads like a story translated from English. And one interesting thing is that I added many notes to explain like the scientific truths or like a scientific, how to say, like the about like the knowledge inside the story, and which is very typical for the translated works, not typical for like the original Chinese writing. So I added the notes to play a game with the readers, that to let them to think about like maybe it's not a Chinese writing but like a translated story. And I thought it was very natural because I just grew up while reading this kind of like the writing. So, and I think it's also very natural for many other younger writers. But what happened is that since then, I, as many other writers, we just began to try to establish our own writing. Some of this writing is still reads a bit like a Western style, but some of them are just not like that. So this is first question. And the second question is that I personally speaking, I really used to have a feeling that I try to resist this like tag as a female writer, even though because Xia Jia is my pen name, which is not that girlish. So some readers, when they started to read my like early works, they may think that they thought that maybe Xia Jia can be a boy or a girl, and I really feel that when they recognize I'm a girl and they had like the certain expectation of female writing to my following writings, I feel a bit like uncomfortable. So what's the meaning of like a female writing, female science fiction writing, which means what? For example, which can mean like a more girlish, sentimental, a story, plot, or characters, or which means that you are not permitted to discuss about like a real hard science facts. So sometimes when they talk about like Xia Jia is a female writer, or Xia Jia is like the young beautiful female writer, I feel really uncomfortable about that. So once for a while, I tried to change my writing style to make it as hard as it could be. And I even tried to mimic, for example, Liu Cixing's writing style, to write something which is really looks similar as Liu Cixing, so that which can be a evidence that as a female I can write as male do. But that's just like the period of my writing experience, and I think right now in recent like maybe 10 years, I became to feel more and more comfortable with my female identity. So that just to speak for myself. And Regina, as a younger writer, I think maybe this is not that's just the same for you.
Yeah, I can actually see what Xiaojia just described. It's not only like a individual or personal case. I actually observed similar things on many Chinese female writers. If you look at some younger writers today, they are still sticking to using male protagonists and using the writing style of this dominant masculine science fiction aesthetics. And I guess it's like Francesco's question point out, it's because that's the dominant culture, and we are so used to reading that, and we think, oh, it's just a natural that we use this Western male protagonist. So when I read Xiaojia's later works, like Chinese Encyclopedia, in which she intentionally used a Chinese female humanities scholar as a protagonist, I feel really excited, because this is the kind of work that attracts me more. And I also want to add that for the name itself, because in China, sometimes it's not so easy to tell from the name. As Xiaojia mentioned, even in the pen name, you can't really tell whether the name is a male name or female name. I think it's one of the characteristic of the Chinese names. And also for example, when I have my Western name Regina, I was not thinking of publishing or things like that. It's just when we are studying in English, in Chinese, we were given an English name at an early age, some very common names. But later on, I kind of changed my own English name, but still think it will be easier for my foreign friends to use this Western name to call me when I'm abroad. It's easy to remember and easy to pronounce, just to make life easier. So when I start to publish myself, I just continue with this name of Regina Kanyu Wang, although the Regina part is just not my official name. I just add it to make it easier. But I do notice that many Chinese science fiction writers, they will keep their original Chinese name or Chinese pen name in their original order when publishing their works. And just also echo with what Xiaojia has just mentioned. I believe that we are all born as the only child of the family. So when we grow up, we don't feel that much difference between being a boy and being a girl, because in our growth, we are the only child of the family. And we didn't experience that much discrimination against gender. And of course, parents will wish you can be the best, and in school, girls are always doing better than boys, actually. So I think our generation don't experience that much of gender discrimination. But after we grow up, when we are at the age of getting married and having child, like this gender issue gender pressure suddenly come to us again. Because as a female, when you grow to a certain age, people will say, oh yeah, you should get married and you should have a child. And in many occasions, you will get the question of, I read this in your story, is it related with your personal experience? So I tend to see like female authors get those questions more often than male authors. So they are not asking, oh, are you like writing this because it's related to your personal life? So I think that's another like interesting point. Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of Francisco, you're muted. And speaking of the name, I think I have another interesting observation that when I start to use like the Xiajia as my like English pen name, at the very beginning, I found that it is like some like a troublesome name for most of the foreign readers, because Xia is very hard to pronounce and to remember. And so after a while, I began to think about like maybe I should have a much more easy name to be remembered. So I asked for my friends, should I have another like a much more normal, conventional English name? So I Summer. Sometimes when I introduce myself, I said, you can call me Xiajia or you can call me Summer. You just prefer the your favorite one, and Summer can be my nickname. But then during my like international communication with many friends who came from like non-English speaking countries, and they all have very hard names for me to remember and to pronounce, and it must be like very careful, and it should be like a how to say, like a polite manner to ask how can I pronounce your name in a proper way in your language, and it's also a very good way to start and to like to make a closer connection with strangers. And at that point, I realized that sometimes I should not to worry about my name is not Western enough. So it's also like a feeling under the pressure of the dominating culture. So the proper way is like to use my name as like a challenge to foreign people. So right now I'm very enjoyed to like challenge people, like please try your best to pronounce Xia. And if they did really good, and I said, yeah, that's a good job, and you can just repeat your practice, and I believe you can do that better. So I think, yeah, that's just very similar to the question we just discussed about be special, be not that conventional. It's not a bad thing, and we just need to enjoy to be that special one. Yeah. Okay, back to Francisco.
Yep. Two things. First, Regina, do you know what your name means in Italian?
Yeah, I know what it means in Latin. It means queen.
Yes, the queen. So
yeah.
You have a very important name.
It makes
even
sense.
though you chose it for English, but
yeah, it makes
Italian
sense
means,
because my family name Wang, it means king in Chinese. It's a very common like family name, but I like choose the English name because it's like very close to my favorite game character's name.
all right. And one other observation for Xiajia, well, you want to change your name according to the dominant culture, but in Milan, I think that the most common name is a Chinese name, not Italian anymore. The kids, they are the most popular name, I think, is Zhao or something like that. It's not an Italian name anymore. So these things are changing, very fast. Thank you. Let's go back to, for example, the Chinese science fiction sector. And when I went to China, and my experience with the Chinese science fiction industry, I've met a lot of editors, writers, and translators, and readers and fans. They were all female, many of them. And at conventions, the majority of the people were women. and even the leaders of important magazines like Storycom or Future Affair Administration or 8 Light Minutes, they're women. So my question is Chinese science fiction given an opportunity to people regardless of their gender? Who wants to start? Maybe now,
I think
Regina.
just
Oh, okay.
it just can follow, because I think it just in the same way of what Regina just talked about, like Regina and I, we are like like maybe a same generation. We just enjoyed the benefits of gender equality in China since 1980s. So not only because we are, that's very, very important that we are only child, and also we live in a period of time that the female are encouraged to do more brilliant things. So when I was a kid, I was expected by my parents to be brilliant, to, for example, to be the fittest, to do some like to study good in science, not only in like literature. And I can feel like the similar feeling in the like same generation girls when we are growing up. We are encouraged to do as brilliant as boys. So I think which can explain why we have so many like female writers and translators and editors. But what is interesting is that you just mentioned there are many leaders in science fiction community who are females. So I think that question is more relevant to maybe, for example, the science fiction community culture. So I think Regina, as one of the most brilliant science fiction fan in China, who can provide more relevant experiences about that. So just
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I believe that one of my observation is that those female leaders are more good at communication and kind of uniting a group of people surrounding them. They like indeed like the persons you mentioned, like even Xiaozi and Yang Feng, they all have like personal charm that their staff are willing to like fight for them and work for them. I think that's a big plus for them. And I also want to point out that if we consider science fiction writing, if anyone randomly are asked to provide representatives of Chinese science fiction, like in most occasions, still you will have the male writer's name mentioned first, and at some occasion, only male author's name. So I remember back in 2017, when Xia Jia was moderating the panel on Chinese science fiction at WorldCon in Helsinki, she particularly put female writers' names in ahead of male writers. So I think that's the first time ever in history that someone is doing that. Yes, so thank you so much. I believe that these years, like the situations are changing because you can see there are anthologies dedicated to female writers. Of course, in the past, there are no anthologies dedicated to male writers either. But if you look at the contents, table of contents, you will find many of them are just by male writers. They just don't say it, but they call it a science fiction anthology on certain topics. But there is no single female writer. But these years, there are like 3 anthologies dedicated to female science fiction writers. And I think that is a phenomenon showing that people are realizing the importance of naming those female writers and having their voices being listened to by the public. And I think like, although currently, for example, the judging boards of science fiction awards and the writing competitions still have a large percentage of males, I think like the situation is developing and changing. People are more and more realizing that, okay, we should consider about this gender equality things. Yeah, because although we ourselves don't feel the discrimination, but structurally, like people may just unconsciously having these all male representatives or judges or things like that. But these years, things are changing.
Yeah. Okay. When it comes to actually,
Yeah, I just want to add
oh,
something.
okay, please, please.
Can I add something more? Sorry, about like the ontology, because that's a very very interesting thing. A few years earlier, is that there was ontology. It's like edited by Liu Cixin and Han Song, and the title of that ontology is like science fiction for children. But I think both of these editors, they do not realize that about like the gender balance should be at least like a political right thing to care about. So when the book is released, someone just noticed that all of the short stories, including stories from foreign writers and Chinese writers, they are all male writers. So I think if it, like the 10 years earlier, it is very common in nature. But right now, people may feel uncomfortable about that. It's not saying that they are doing something right, but they do not realize that it's unnatural to have ontology exclude female writers. Yeah, so I think sometimes you need to inform, to let them know that you should realize that you just ignore some of the writers, and you should like adjust your strategy of, for example, adding the ontology or like inviting writers to like a competition or etc. things like that. So speaking of like my representation in 2017, in the very beginning, I just used like the natural order to make my slides and to introduce the male writers in the first. But at that time, I realized that when I mentioned the writers in 1990s, the percentage of gender of gender is still very unbalanced. We have like, for example, 10 famous male writers, but only 2 female writers. So it's natural to introduce a male writer firstly. But when this come to like the writers after the 2000, I have one slide of like about like 10 male writers and one slide for another female writers. So there's no reason to give the introduction of the male writer first. So that's the very point of time that I realized that things is changing, and I have to change myself, my own idea accordingly, and I have to how to say 提醒 to let other people to realize the similar changing. Yeah, so that's it.
Yes, I totally agree. Of course, there, if I can add something here, as also as an editor, as my personal experience, one thing is to artificially introduce the pink quota, which I don't like, and another thing is to naturally and broaden your reading list so that naturally you get better stories from many sources. And that's what Xia just said. It's natural that you get good stories from many different sources and all the genders, of course, just because you allow these stories to reach you. But if you just ask the stories to your friend, to your longtime drinking pal, or whatever it is, of course you get a biased selection. So just here we are, equally, evenly distributed, but I don't care, because here, when there is no filter to enter, anybody can enter, and we're here. So that's the thing. Remove the filter from the bottom, and you will get a fair distribution at the top. That's my, strategy, my method of achieving a balanced. Because that's also the case that if you let the distribution be, natural, the best the best stories will appear, regardless of who is the author, whether he's a male or a female. That's my 2 cents. Okay, so I want to move to the stories, actually, right, inside the tissue of the narratives. And let's say that reading your personal stories, I found many times, cheating partners, demanding fathers, arrogant bosses, and of course, in your stories, there are many examples of male attitude and forms of patriarchy. Okay. So how do you think that fiction, and in particular science fiction, can help to overcome those examples, those realities? Who wants to go first? Regina, now you?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I can go first. So I believe that when I first started to write science fiction, I didn't thought much about those representations of like male characters, as you mentioned, as a patriarchal symbol. I don't know, like when I look back at the early stories I write, I do see a tendency, like unconsciously writing about those topics you mentioned.
Yeah.
Like, in fact, I didn't do that on purpose. And it's after I start to think about that, I found that when I write those stories, there is a growth of the female protagonist, because I always have a female protagonist. There is a growth from this female protagonist from a little girl to like grown up woman. But I have to admit that I still like haven't achieved much growth on the male characters. And I believe that's something that I need to improve in the future. And talking about the patriarchal structure, I want to bring up two anthologies actually written by male authors. So, oh yeah, there are like anthologies intentionally dedicated to male authors in China. There are two of them. They are called the matriarchy societies. So, all by male fantasy and science fiction writers. 母系氏族系列 and published by Zhou Noveland. So they invite these all male writers to write about matriarchal societies. And I read like those two anthologies. They include maybe 24 of stories or something like that. You will see like some of the stories are not related with the topic at all. And for those stories related with the topic, most of them are just a simple overtone of the current patriarchal society. So instead of male being dominant, they have female being dominant, but as violent and as arrogant as males. So
that's the same.
Yeah, I found it very insane, actually. Yeah. And I also noticed that, for example, if you read some of the stories by female writers, when they are imagining a future society with a different gender structure, they tend to have a different portrait. For example, in Shi Hui's insect nest, 虫巢, she has this alien society in which the girls are taking care of boy trees. And so those boys, they grow in the earth, and they have to rely on the girls to take care of them in order to grow up. And when both of them are grown ups, they kind of have to go through a path in the forest and merge with each other and become a giant insect to enter the real maturity of their life. So that's very interesting imagination, instead of just overturning the current patriarchal society into this matriarchal society. She has provided a more like interdependent and more fluid structure of gender imagination. So I think, yeah, I'm not trying, or maybe I am trying to criticizing those male authors because I found that their stories are so like similar. If you look at the anthology, it's like all the same model, but there are like more imaginations from female authors about the gender society, although they won't be realizing that they are creating this alternative version of gender imagination. They are just trying to write about a story that they think are good story and use their imagination and not like on purpose try to like build a utopia for female or things like that.
Right. Thank you. Chaja?
Yeah, thanks for Regina. I totally agree with Regina that the simply overturn the current structure is not a very good way to even just to tell a good story. And speaking of the characters, I think actually for most of the writers, science fiction writers, when they establish a, like especially short story, they're just trying to like to show or to tell like one opinion. For example, how could a human being to embrace a better technology? This kind of opinion. So it's very conventional way to establish the opposite of two characters. One is just stick to the positive value, and his or her rival just to stick to like the negative value. And it's of course more conventional for like the positive character to be a male and the negative character to be a female. Like the male character, he's like a more reasonable. He's more like have like the power of logic, so he can always choose like the right side of the human being. But the female character, because of her, for example, sensitivity or like emotional characteristics, she always fails to have that like a right choice. So I think when I start to reflect on this convention, I just tried to converse this convention that I deliberately choose the female as a positive character and the male as a negative character. So that's I think that's a very natural thing as when I try to develop my own writing strategy. So I think that's why you can see that Regina and I, sometimes we both use like a young female who is living a troublesome life as a main character, and she has to like fight for herself, fight for her personal life, and for doing that she has to overcome like the pressure from all of these male characters around her. So I think that's one side of the story. And but recently I found that myself began to try to establish like a conversation between male and female characters. For example, one of my short story, it's Duet of Love, right? Duet of Love, which has already been translated into English and included in my anthology, a collection, The Summer Beyond Our Reach. So that story is composed as like the, letters between a teacher and a student. So the teacher is a male and the student is a female. But so the student has some questions and she wants to get answers from the teacher. But that teacher he's a very good teacher because he did not just give the only right answer directly to the student, but he give back more questions and inspire that student to think about more. So that's a very good, ideal kind of like conversation between two persons, not just like a male and a female conversations. So I think in the future, I would try to establish to develop more and more positive male characters and try to use these characters to tell really good stories. Yeah, so that's it.
All right. Thank you. I want to continue on, let's say, a bit on this topic, because as a writer myself, I know what you're talking about, especially when you have to get out of your comfort zone, because we tend to write inside our own gender, right? It makes us feel, of course, more comfortable. And often male writers have been accused of putting female characters, as you said, in secondary position, or representing them as weak, as fragile, these stereotypes, do you think that this thing is due to the men's minor ability to listen to the other, to in comparison to the female empathy, feel for the others? Or maybe it's just a matter of being a good writer and not a so good writer? Because as you said, how do you deal with male characters when you have to get out of your comfort zone? Because in reality, a book is made of many characters, and so they have to talk to each other. Regina, you said you have also a bit of uncomfortable with but that's a part of growing up.
Yeah, I think I don't want to essentialize like gender characteristics.
Yes.
Yes, so I don't think it's like females' ability to better like understand each other. I guess it's still like whether the writer wants to write this character well enough. So for example, one kind of writer, they don't care about their character at all. They don't care about like the gender of their character. Their story are serving for the science fiction idea. Like Liu Cixin has mentioned multiple times that all his characters, he doesn't mind whether they are male or female, they are serving as like science fiction, this sense of wonder. And but still he writes good story, even if he provides some like negative female protagonists. They are kind of have strong impression in like on the readers. So, and another kind of writer, I believe that they care about some characters, but don't care about other characters. And the characters they care about happen to be males who are more similar to themselves, because it's easier for them to focus on this voice that are similar to themselves. And they think, oh, maybe the other characters are not that important. I don't want to put that much effort on those characters. And I think it's not like the ability of like certain gender above the other, but more about the writing skill and the writer's attitude towards their characters.
Okay. Shall I move on? Okay. Or Jiajia, you want to add something? Maybe we don't see you, right?
I'm frozen.
Yeah, you're frozen.
Yeah, I can hear your voice. I can hear your voice, but all of the images just like frozen. But if my voice is not okay, so I just want to add something. Speaking of like the empathy, I agree with Regina that I don't think that female are naturally good at empathy, emphasize with others. It depends on like a personal experiences. For example, when I was a very young girl, I used to be a very tough, powerful, energetic, and boyish girl.
Oops. Now we lost you. Oh.
With my girlfriends when they're talking about like they're uncomfortable during their periods. So I think that's okay. So that's just like a like weakness of some like a girlish girl. As a tough girl, I would never be bothered by that uncomfortable. But when I grew up and I began to like a weaker and weaker and began to more and more can get such feeling, I realized that it's not because I'm natural girl, so that I can emphasize with every girls. It depends on my experiences and my feeling of imaginative to imagine other people's feeling and their lives. So back to writing, as you mentioned, that it's not maybe it maybe matters with being a good writer or not so good writer. And I think good writing is always about others and for others. That's very important. You can be very brilliant, talented to write yourself stories. But as a great writer, you always have to like jump out of your, as you said, your comfort zone and to write about others. Am I still online?
Yes, you're online. We lost you for 10 seconds, but we get the message loud and clear. So thank you. That was very interesting.
So I think that's the thing is that when you try to write some characters who are dramatically different from yourself, not just like the genders, but also, for example, like the ages, cultures, previous experiences, education levels, you always need that ability to imagine, to understand their feelings and try to like how to say, like in the shoes of them,
Yes.
to, from their point of views to see this world, to understand this world. And you should like to allow all of these different point of views to coexist and to talk with each other. And I think that's very important ability for a good writer. So that's it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I want to ask one last question before we open to the question from the audience. Feel free to, I don't know if you both want to answer. Okay. So the question is about technology and the rising of artificial intelligence in China. And there's a number of people that are working as taggers and developers and are writing the algorithm of our existence. But biases of all sorts are just embedded into bad programming. So who is in charge of those decisions? Is considering women in their programming, or are they even women who are programming? Are women involved in this process? Because once the phenomenon is out, it will be probably too late, sorry, or too complicated to fix it as doing it right in the first place. So are you aware of anything about that?
Yeah, maybe I can start first. Since Xiaojia is still frozen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do notice that in many of the science fiction stories, and even in our real life, those artificial intelligence assistants tend to have a female gender. So you will always hear female voices as a default setting for those artificial assistants. I think that's, I think some people already start to notice this and start to put on some policies or like statements about how discrimination should be avoided during those programming development. But that may have a connection with the long-term stereotype of female being in the more assistant position for males. And it just feels so natural if nobody is pointing it out and we just accept it. Since we already have female assistants in so many different social aspects in our life, like you will always have female picking up a phone call or sitting at a reception desk. And so you just suppose, oh, those artificial intelligence should also be female. But it's like as long as someone is pointing this phenomenon out and the people are thinking about that, things are going to change, I believe, or I hope. Yeah, there
Yeah,
Rika
thank you.
just posted a documentary concerning this
Yeah.
issue. Yeah.
So it looks like we are reproducing an existing model. You know, we are just imposing onto the artificial intelligence the same power structure that we have in reality. So it's not very good. Xiaojia, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I can still hear you, but I cannot see any like a
I'm sorry.
motional pictures. So for me, I think one more thing I want to mention is that actually this artificial intelligence issue is closely related to the digital capitalism, and during this process, I think not just the gender issues. The bias is not just about gender issues, but about like, for example, your ability to consume, to buy things. So in China right now, we have a large population of middle class female. They earn good money and they can live very enjoyable life, and they are the target of many of this kind of algorithm because they have this ability to consume. So sometimes they are on the net, they have like the special it's not a buy. I don't know how to describe this. It's kind of like not a bias, but it's still like a bias. But because there's like a tendency to describe female as like a natural consumers, because they like a good stuff, they like good costume, they like a fashion. So they are encouraged to buy more things to show their, for example, independent, because they can buy these things for themselves. And I think it's, for me, it's sometimes it's not very good feeling about these things, but I think it's much more complicated than like the simply bias, like for example the secondary position of female. Sometimes even though this kind of females, they are how to say, they are just treated like goddess, but is that really goddess, or do they really have power to change something, to do something more positive? That's a question. So I think that, yeah, I just want to want to mention this dimension of this question. Yeah. So that's
Okay.
it.
No, thank you. That was really interesting. Really interesting. I wonder if women are the target, who is, you know, the one that is, you know, in charge of it. It's really interesting, the shift into, you know, digital capitalism, how it is changing the way we perceive our own actions, and how we are tracked into all the, you know, little behavior, little act. Yeah, that's scary in a way. But as a science fiction writer, you know, we have also the ability to, you know, to make people aware about that. So especially, you know, cloud and mist, I remember there is some issues about that, you know, the handling of data, and how we try to limit the use of our private information. That's all about, you know, fighting back in a way, whether you are a man or a woman, of course. uh, I wonder if there is any question from the audience. You can either write it down, or turn on your mic, or raise your hand, or let me know somehow, or otherwise I will continue with, yeah, please. Hello.
Hi there. My name is Dave. I'm a huge
Dave.
fan of both of the speakers' body of works. I have a question for Regina. I recently read your short story, Restaurant. which I utterly enjoyed, in which with your amazing imagination, you created this location that always has this vibe of weird fiction. And I was just wondering, how does that kind of element come into your writing? And do you have any authors that have influenced this style of writing? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, for that particular story, the seafood restaurant, it actually started out as a solicitation, anyway, the word, from a magazine. They want a science fiction story, they want a food story related with emotion. So I was thinking about how to combine science fiction and food and emotion. So at that time, I was traveling in the US, in the New England area. And when I post a picture of being in New England, one of my Facebook friends says, hey, you are in the place where many of the Lovecraft stories are happening. So I suddenly think of, okay, so Lovecraft has once mentioned that fear is the deepest emotion of human beings. And I personally have a similar fear against octopus as the female protagonist in the seafood restaurant. So I sort of combining this fear against this seafood with science fiction elements. And this particular story has, of course, been influenced by the Cthulhu stories a lot, those weird fiction. And it's also kind of a trial for my own writing to combine my nonfiction writing with science fiction writing, because I had been struggling between mainstream literature and science fiction for a long time. There are no inferior or superior, but they tend to have different aesthetics. If you read the mainstream literature magazines and the science fiction magazines, the editors and the readers are looking for different things, but there are no superior or inferiors between them. I was struggling between them. So when I can't write the good science fiction stories that I want to write, I started to write nonfiction stories in which I put more of myself in those writings. Because originally, in my science fiction writing, I try to avoid admitting that I'm writing myself. But then through nonfiction writing, I know that I'm writing about myself. And I kind of embrace that, okay, yes, I can put myself, put my personal feelings in the stories, honestly. So when I wrote the story, The Seafood Restaurant, I was kind of putting my personal feelings in the story. There are some similarities between me and the protagonist, like the fear against the seafood, like I also had published a food book using a pen name, but I once was a food writer. And also like this feeling about resisting being the same with all the others surrounding you. So I also use this first person narrative, which rarely existed in my previous stories. And I feel like, okay, by putting more of myself in the story and admitting that honestly, I got more freedom in writing the story. And it kind of later become one of my own favorite stories, because I feel like it's very me. It's not like the traditional or mainstream science fiction or like fun fiction, fun literary stories. It's just a very Regina story.
All right, thank you. Are there other questions from the audience? All right, then I will have another one. Well, I have a couple, but um, I will put in a question that was asked by Francesca. I find it very interesting, and we go back to the original theme of this meeting. So, um, in a way, it deals with the representation, again, the stereotype. So the idea of a feminist position, of a feminist literature. And of course, we should, overcome this position of this dualism, right? Of course, there is a problem that we have to improve and we have to arrive through that. But when we arrive, let's imagine, an utopian future where we have overcome this representativity. So the idea is, um, even if a feminist science fiction focuses on some aspects, to claim its dominance, as we said, moving from a patriarchy to a matriarchy, but reproducing the same power structure, right? So maybe we should move over to this implication. And do you think that these things flow naturally, or do you have to think to remove, in a way, these patterns, this dualism? Is it clear? Xiaojia?
So I just mentioned that I think that what is important is because, like, when you how to say, when you for example, to choose two ways from one another, it's just you already fell into the trap of like opposition mode, or like the, how to say, the mode of thought, which is just like the constructed by opposition things. So the way to try to escape from the trap is that to think not just for example, not just like the opposite of A is B, but what is other than A, right? So the answer is not the only one, but can be something all around A. So you can just try to explore different directions to find out what is hidden in the marginal fields, and what is like the hidden by the dominating culture. And you can find there are more and more alternative possibilities. So I think it's what is important is just change your way of thinking. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah, but in this respect, I really think that science fiction can offer this room, this freedom to experiment with narratives, with it has been, of course, done before, since the 60s and 70s, with the destroying of the monolithic structure, of the male protagonist, the Star Trek captain, the Kirk model, right? So, but it's still, there's a long way. And my next question is going in this direction. Okay, I again use a dualism, but just to show it. Okay, just to show that these forces are the two things we need to work on, right? So if a man can be considered like an infection, right, like in the Matrix example, and all the narrative of the cyberpunk is totally masculine, aggressive, violent, can women be considered an affection associated, for example, with the emergence of solar punk, with the inclusivity of new species, of overcoming these barriers? Are these two the destroying force and building force, or is it too black and white, too simple? Who wants
Yeah, I
start?
think it's a very good way to to write a myth, because like a myth is just constructed by like the dualist, right? Dualist conceptions like the god of creating and the god of destroying. And just I mentioned that when we describe men as like an infection, we are just a call for something other than men or other than the infection characteristic inside most of a human being, not just the men, right? So sometimes we just put the hope side into the other gender, and sometimes we put the hope like in for example, the children, because the children do not have that perfection characteristic. So I think it's not important like which kind of image to represent the otherness or alternatives, but to just realize that there's always some other opportunities to give us to develop. Yeah, so that's my very easy answer. And back to your last description that most of this exploration already be explored by the writers in the 60s and the 70s. I think what is important is that at that time, all around the world, many of the scholars, the intellectuals, they all have like the common sense that we have to unite together with all of this otherness, like the females, like the people in the third world, even though we have so many differences, but we have the common enemy, which is capitalism. And we have to build up our own like trippers, our own powers to fight against this. But what is happening is that in this age of the post-capitalism or like the post-revolution, sometimes we just find there's no other way to do. So capitalism is like the only game in the town. So except for capitalism, what can we have? So I think the problem is that we just cannot feel that strong feeling of connection with otherness, right? So as a female, I think that maybe I can only emphasize with like the Chinese young female, just which has so many similarities with me self, but very hard to emphasize with like a female from other country, from other cultures. So that's a problem. So the empathy is not very natural thing. As I mentioned, that we need this imagination to imagine what's our position or what's our what's a strategy of making things better and what we can do to collaborate with others. And we need to have this big picture to establish this empathy. So that's my feeling about this the thing. So I don't think it's natural to describe the female as our only safe power to save the humanity from this dark catastrophe. But we can use the image as a representation, and we can use that to create good stories. That's no problem. But I think the thing is more complicated than that. Yeah.
Okay. Roderick, you want to jump in?
If there's still time, I have a small question. Francesco, you said that a lot of the organization in China and Chinese organizations is being done by women, which is of course fantastic. So I think this would be a good question for Regina. What would you like to see happen in the science fiction industry, as you describe in your article? Where would you like to see it go?
Wow, that's a good question. Yeah, I think of course, I'd like to see it grow bigger. Firstly, of course, with combined efforts to make the cake bigger before everyone starting to have a share of it. And also in the process, I want to see that just as Xiaojia mentioned, try to imagine about other possibilities because if we look at the industry perspective, you will still see that the best-selling works are still Liu Cixin's stories and the films adapted by his stories. So like it's still a very dominant style of science fiction that all the industry companies want to invest in. So I believe that like seeing the possibilities of others, of alternatives, is also important here. It's not necessarily need to be one or the other, like not necessarily to be, oh, we don't want more like hard science fiction, we want more soft science fiction. It's all about more opening up to more diverse aesthetics and opening up to more kinds of stories that these companies see possibilities of investing in. Because there are many like brilliant stories with various styles, and it's not always the Liu Cixin style story should get the most opportunities. So just to echo to what Xiajia said, like opening to more possibilities.
I have a complaint here. Because I'm still waiting for your novels, and I'm still waiting and waiting for your novel. Xiajia knows, and you know, Regina, it's, you know, come on, put it out.
Yeah, we've been pushing Xiajia to finish her novel or like series of this connected stories for years.
Otherwise, we're left with Liu Cixin stories all the time, and he has a lot of novels, but you have to provide the novels to the publishers. Come on.
There are more like female writers writing novels. Like Chu Hui, as I just recommended to you, she has produced many stories and also novels. I believe like she wears more attention because she herself has this low-key personality and don't do a lot of self-promotions or like networking, but her works are like worth being read and translated and
yeah. All right. Yes, I'm really looking for longer material because the short stories are there. We have been reading many short stories, but now is the time, you know, to jump on the long narrative and provide also readers with novels, huh? Right? Okay. Are there any other questions? I think we are around time. It's almost 75 minutes, something. So, okay, there's a question. Xiajia, you produced and acted in your own movie. How was your experience making the movie? Do you feel it was more difficult as a woman? I know it was not big budget, but you still had a lot of problems to solve, which I expect would be harder for a woman here in the West.
So first of all, most of my movies or like short videos are produced during I'm like getting my master degree at University of Communication of China. And by that time, I was just to having my master degree in film studies. So it's part of like my work or my preparation for my future career. Because at that time, I still have a dream that maybe I can participate in the development of Chinese science fiction movies. But several years later, I just give up that dream because I think that it's still the industry, the science fiction film industry was still immature at that time in China. So I had needed to pay great efforts to do some like not that important works. But speak of my longest movie, which is called Parapax, which is actually collaborated with my male friend, and we accidentally or coincidentally have very similar names because he's a he's a male, but his Chinese name is Wang Yao, which sounds just as the same
Just
as
like
my true name Wang Yao. Yeah, but the characters are different. So that's what Regina mentioned, that in Chinese sometimes it's very difficult to tell if the name is male or female. So we became good friends, and he also have great enthusiasm in filmmaking. So we talked about like the possibility that we can make some very low budget science fiction movie using some like how to say, like scales, or like some like just try to tell, for example, stories happen in parallel timelines, which can restrict the use of special efforts, special effects, and just to focus on the story or the possibilities of the story itself. So I wrote the screen, and I played 3 main characters in the movie, because it's like the, how to say, the framework story, like one story inside another story. So I think it's not that tough, because I have one like a collaborator who can just organize all of these other friends to do the filmmaking work, and I can just focus on my own work. Speaking of that, I just just a few weeks earlier, I watched the Nomadland, right? Is that, do I pronounce that in the right way? Nomadland, because we all know that that's made by Asian Chinese. I don't know if she's a Chinese or Chinese American, but she's like an Asian female director.
Yeah.
And we also know like the process of her filmmaking. And I think that on one hand, of course, as like a female curator, and like a female artist, you have to deal with all of these very practical issues during your creation. You have to settle down all of these problems. But on the other hand, I think it's very important to stick to what you want to express in the very beginning. So I think Nomadland is about like a group of American people's life, but still you can feel this point of view from the boundaries, right? Like the marginal area. So I think that's a very good one to speaking about like the female filmmaking. But my work is just a very, very little something. No need to mention.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Nomadland, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I also have a novel called Nomadland by coincidence. Crazy. All right. I don't know if there are any other. Yeah, Dave. Yeah, please.
If we have time for another question, I have a question that goes out to Ms. Xia, huge fan of your works as well. I know that aside from being a sci-fi writer, you're also a sci-fi researcher, and you've published many essays and one anthology of your study. How do you see the gender situation in the sci-fi research field go in China, and how do you personally navigate the roles of being a sci-fi writer and a sci-fi researcher? Thank you.
Thanks for your question. One thing is that I think the gender, I think, first of all, science fiction studies in China is still a very new thing. And we just began to establish like a academic field of our own. We still do not have any like professional magazine or journal to publish like a science fiction studies, essays and papers. But we already have some kind of community, and we have like conferences where we can exchange ideas. So in this stage, most of the people still focus on, for example, the Chineseness of Chinese science fiction. And I think later on we can like to develop more diverse areas and directions of science fiction studies. So in this stage, I think the female issues is still not that how to say magnificent enough in science fiction studies in China. Some people try to discuss about like a very superficial level things. For example, the female characters in very old-fashioned study approaches. And for me, I think sometimes I just maybe I just try to avoid to deal with gender issues in science fiction studies directly, but I want to, how to say, to include such kind of like a point of view or observation into my own problematics. So right now, I would say that I haven't published any science fiction study paper under the title of, for example, female consciousness or female writing in Chinese science fiction. That's a bit pity, and I will do something more in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Haven't they just opened a science fiction study magazine in Chengdu? I think I was at some opening ceremony of at some university. Well, but yes, as you said, it's everything is at the early stage at the moment for science fiction studies. Yes, there is room for improvement, of course. Okay, if there are no other questions, I will just briefly wrap up. Really, it's been really a pleasure. A lot of things have been dealt with. I think a very high level of expertise, and really thank Xia Jia and Regina, Kanyu, Wang for being our wonderful guest from one from Europe, Norway, the other from China, and I'm in Italy. I really like this, and Anna is in Brazil. I really like this, coverage of the world. I thank you all for being with us. I hope you had a good time, and I really encourage you to read and search for female science fiction. And I wouldn't call it, the diversity, because it's the normality of our, experiencing with life. So if you want to find out more, follow these two very good writers and read more about them. Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much
you.
for putting together this. Yeah, always
Thank
doing
you,
amazing
Francisco.
jobs of bringing diverse voices to diverse
Thank you.
audience.
Thank you. Thank you.
为你点赞。
Yeah.
And if you come into Italy, let me know, okay? We're gonna have, especially you, Regina. I was saying that we have a Eurocon. So if you want to come to Italy, let me know. From Oslo, it shouldn't be so complicated.
Yeah, let's see how the border restriction goes. Currently.
There's no border restrictions. We do it in mid-July, so you can definitely.
Okay. Yeah, but
yeah.
Going back to Norway, I think there's some restriction on like quarantine
you think so?
and the test. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's see, in 2 months, maybe things will be.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. You're very young. I hope I get one vaccine at least. I should be there. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Also say hello to your family. To
Eileen.
To Sophia.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for being with us. A lot of people, a lot of friends, really. Toya Tachihara from Japan. Really, it's really great.
Yeah. So again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening,
good night,
and good night.
Yeah.
Thanks for the panel, guys. It was great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Shall we, for example, to have like the, how to say, like a photograph, like of everybody who showed up their faces?
Screenshots.
Yeah,
I
just
made a picture.
screenshot. It just became like a. You already made the picture.
Yeah, but you should have said that before. Now everybody left.
But it's recorded,
Oh,
right?
okay.
The whole thing.
Yeah, it's recorded.
Yes. Okay. So just stop
If
here.
you want to open up your webcam, we can make a picture. No,
I'm not very good at screenshot. Yeah. Bye bye.
I made a
Bye-bye.
picture before, but now I don't know. I
Okay,
can make
so
another one.
later you can send the picture in the WeChat group.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Martina, don't put the phone on the camera. I'm doing it. Good. Thank you. I will share it online.
Great.
Yeah, I will put it on WeChat.
So happy to see so many fresh faces.
Oh, wait, maybe. Oh, now you're turning on the camera now. So that means you were not really listening, right? Okay, there you go. Dave and Luca, we got you. Oh, you want me to? Okay, fine. Thank you very much. I will organize something in the next week, so keep you posted. Okay.
Perfect. Keep doing the great work, Francesco.
Well, I wouldn't do anything without you, so I need,